when I was a teacher, we used backwards planning, where you would start with your objectives. So for that grading period, what were my main objectives that I wanted the students to have by the end of that grading period? And then I would work backwards. It's the same concept with planning communications, for example. So now if I'm sending out an internal comm, I will carefully consider my audience first.
Welcome to the Supercharge Marketing Podcast. I'm Pius.
And I'm Thomas, and we're from Lumen 5, an AI video creator made by marketers for marketers. This podcast is for those who believe in the power of purposeful communication, brand storytelling, and thought leadership.
We feature the insights, experiences, and best practices shared by tenured marketers, communicators, and B2B leaders.
Are you ready to supercharge your marketing?
Today, I'm joined by Nora Ioane. She's a business marketing manager for cardiac services at SpecialtyCare, with a background that spans education, internal comms, and now high-stakes healthcare marketing. Nora brings a uniquely empathetic and strategic voice to the way medical brands build trust and engagement, especially in the cardiac space where the stakes couldn't be higher. Welcome, Nora.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to dig into your perspective, especially how you bridge, education, communication, and healthcare. So let's jump right in, and that's where I want to start. So you have a unique point of view coming from applying, best practices in the learning environment and the education environment to communications. I'd love for you to kind of unpack that a bit, maybe your journey and how you got here.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I have a background in secondary education. I spent about 8 years teaching high school English, and that included sophomores, juniors, and seniors, but a majority of those years were spent with the sophomores, so kids that were 15, 16 years old. That was a great experience. I had so much fun, but eventually I just kind of wanted to test out my other skill set and see how I could use, my writing ability in a different market. And that's kind of how I gradually moved into copywriting and then into marketing. But one thing that I've noticed is just in the ways that I would teach, and you almost have to approach every group of students differently. Everyone has a different learning style and capability. So you're going to be more effective if you can accommodate what you're trying to teach and make sure that you're hitting your audiences the right way and meeting them where they are. A lot of those lessons from education have translated over into comms and marketing for me, where it's the same concept. You have to make sure that you're reducing that cognitive load. Make sure that the messages are simple and memorable, and especially in comms, making sure that they're actionable, giving them something to react to. So a lot of what I do now is not very far off from what I did as a teacher back in the day.
That's so cool. No, I appreciate you sharing. I want to unpack that maybe just a little bit more. So when you're thinking about messaging, where do you go? Back to kind of your education days, walk me through kind of your thought process of hey, how do I now educate my message or my audience with the messaging that I have here in the comm space?
Yeah.
What goes through your mind as you develop that messaging? Yeah.
Yeah. So the thought process I've noticed for me is the same as when I was a teacher. When I was a teacher, we used backwards planning, where you would start with your objectives. So for that grading period, what were my main objectives that I wanted the students to have by the end of that grading period? And then I would work backwards to figure out, okay, how can I chunk this information, or how can I scaffold these skills as I model them until we get to achievement for them. It's the same concept with planning communications, for example. So now if I'm sending out an internal comm, I will carefully consider my audience first. What is it that I want my audience to take away from this message? What's the end goal? What's the objective here? I start there, and then I backwards plan, and I find ways to make sure that I'm communicating directly that message, that I'm not, filling it in with fluff information that they don't need, that I'm staying concise. In healthcare, our associates are extremely busy, so we're lucky if they have time to glance at their email. So I have to make sure that I'm being mindful of their time and respectful of their attention. And all of that comes into play whenever I'm thinking back and making sure that I'm, one, staying true to the message, and two, being mindful of the language that I'm using. So with our comms, we have a couple of different audiences. So we might be, if it's an internal comm, we might be sending out something just to our clinicians. If it's external, we might be communicating something to hospital leaders or potential clients. In all of those realms, everyone brings a different set of knowledge to the conversation. So it's good to kind of consider who your audience is, what they already know. So that way you're not overwhelming them with content that, is not new to them, but it still carries a weight. So as the reader, you will weigh them down if you're adding in unnecessary copy. So just kind of knowing that, like, for example, if we're sending something out to patients, then reducing the amount of hospital jargon is going to be very important. If we're sending something out to clinicians, then reducing the amount of corporate jargon is going to be very important. We have to almost code switch when we're considering our audience, and that's what's going to make the message clearer and more effective.
I love that. No, that's so good. And I think, yeah, it's easy to, think about this in theory, but I think in practice, it's always harder to, start with the end goal. What's the, like, as you said, with lesson planning, what's the outcome I want here? And then backwards plan towards that. So I love that a lot. And my next question was going to be, when you're thinking about copy, like what, they don't have a lot of time, especially with attention spans, as they are today. So how are you now, maybe taking out copy and that sort of thing? So you mentioned jargon, depending on the audience, but yeah, is there anything else? Like, how do you break through the noise? I mean, it's just so hard right now. And so how do you think about that? If your end goal is like, hey, I just want them to like read this, how do you kind of go about, breaking through? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, it's something that I would relate back to teaching as well. When I was teaching teenagers. So they're at that very unique age where they're feeling their independence. They're moving further away from the thoughts and ideas that they've inherited, and instead kind of feeling out which thoughts and ideas are their own, which ones feel authentic to who they are at that time. So whenever I was teaching, I had to be careful with how I positioned any of my statements or any of my lesson plans. If I wanted it to hit home with them, I had to be careful to make sure that I wasn't presenting the information in a way that was eye roll inducing, especially for that age group, and it's not very different from the audiences that I work with now, especially with these busy and oftentimes overworked healthcare audiences. You have to kind of make sure that you're using your time wisely, because they can read through the fluff. You never want to risk, or I don't want to risk, almost damaging their trust in me, or damaging their trust in the company that I'm speaking on behalf of. So transparency, plays into it, and that can affect the copy that you put in front of the reader. There are certain ways that you could say the same thing, but without layers of fluff that's built in. And sometimes when the reader can sense the fluff, they lose that trust in the source. It's almost like they're signaling, well, you don't trust me well enough to just be straightforward with me, and now I just want to delete this email. I've already checked out of it. So you've got a finite amount of time to have their attention. So you might as well be as transparent as you can, and as mindful of their time as you can be. And I think that always leads with empathy for their position and their role in a hospital setting. It's already delicate. They don't have time to kind of sift through and decide if you're trustworthy or not. So you might as well lead with copy that is trustworthy and save them some time, save yourself some time.
So good. Yeah. I mean, I think you said it there. You have such a unique experience where, yeah, if you can break through the noise and get the attention, I think, of teenagers nowadays, I think that makes you uniquely positioned to get to break through the noise for.
When I was a teacher, we used to always kind of corner the kids into this realm of, oh, well, they're constantly on their phones or they're constantly on tech. And so we almost would position the tech as a teenager specific issue, when in 2025, it's no longer a teenage specific issue. It's an everyone issue. So the same attention span problems that encountered as a teacher, I see them today, even with adults. So it's still valid. We are all of our attention spans have shortened significantly. Teenagers get a hard rep, but it seems to be more of a global issue that we're encountering.
No, you got it for sure. And I think that's the challenge, obviously, as a marketer and communicator today is,
Mhm.
how do you break through the noise? But there are ways, and I think you've already shared some of them. I'm glad you mentioned trust. I think, especially in your space, where it's healthcare and it's incredibly high stakes, and I think trust has such a big part of that. You mentioned a few ways that you build trust already, but yeah, do you want to unpack that maybe a little bit? Like, what other ways do you build trust through your content or your comms, especially with so many different stakeholders? You mentioned transparency, but yeah, anything else that you do? Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that is extremely valuable to me is making sure that I have a team to lay eyes on these messages before they go out. And the more that you can vary your team of reviewers, the better. So for me, that might look like someone in our operations realm. It might look like someone on our sales team. It might look like a clinician, because those messages will land differently to all of those eyes. There might be something that has a bit of nuance that I'm not privy to that someone else in the company would know because they have a different perspective based on their department. So if you can create almost like a short team of people that you really trust that have a different outlook than yours, then I think you are increasing the odds that your message will land among the largest group possible, versus just landing on the minds that might work very similar to your own. So, I might include a message that to me seems totally fine and, without fault, but from a clinician's point of view, based on information they know and they experience every single day, that specific sentence might not land well and it actually might cause more damage. So I like to have kind of a checks and balances situation in place for myself just to make sure I'm not relying on my own take. So I find strength in having a good team around me. I find strength in being vulnerable with my team and admitting, like, hey, I don't have the healthcare background here. I have the writing background, I have the comms background. But from a busy clinician standpoint, I don't truly know what that's like. And the best I can do is bring in someone who does and make sure that this is not a tone deaf message that we're sending out. So it takes a little extra time and patience, but to me it makes all the difference, because if you can catch something that can avoid any type of pain or negative reaction, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. That's so good. And I think, a very practical tip to take away, right, is just
Yeah.
pick, your different audiences, pick somebody in your internal kind of circle and send them a quick message, right? Send them a quick note of the message that you're about to send out and say, hey, any quick thoughts there. So I really like that. I think oftentimes we can, get stuck in our, as you say, minds or in our everyday functions, and you forget that, hey, this is going out to people that think a lot differently than me, have a lot more different experiences and education and that sort of thing. And so how do you speak to them? And especially in such a field like yourself, right? Like where healthcare just has so many different functions and expertise, and that's great. I think having the humility to say, hey, I need others to, to quickly, this makes sense to me, but I need others to quickly sign
Right.
off on this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So you mentioned a few different audiences, right? And there's internal teams, there's, patients, there's a hospital partners, all sorts of different stakeholders. Um, yeah, what other ways do you kind of think about? I think we talked a lot about it already, but is there anything else you think about in terms of like, hey, this is my stakeholder, how do I adjust my messaging for them?
Yeah. Yeah. There's certain things that I try to keep top of mind based on, which group of stakeholders I'm talking to. So let's say if it's patients, there's going to always be a few things that I keep top of mind. And that's going to be the fact that we want to reassure them. of the service. Usually there's a lot of anxiety with any kind of surgery or procedure that a patient might be considering or prepping for. Simplifying the message is always going to be top of mind for me. Again, making sure that we remove any of that jargon, just because the use of the jargon can sometimes make the reader feel like they're being duped. So, while it might make the speaker feel elevated, you run the risk of losing your audience, and that's the whole purpose of the communication. So if you want it to be a two-way process, as it should be with a sender and a receiver, you have to make sure that you prioritize the receiver over yourself as the sender. For hospital partners, I'm always going to kind of keep metrics, efficiency, cost savings, those kind of things at the forefront of my brain as I'm positioning things. For internal teams, I'm going to try to make sure that I keep the purpose as my main director. What is the purpose of this message? Why is it important to them? Why am I taking up their time right now? Because internally, we want to respect their time as much as we can. And the more that we flood their inboxes, the more we're taking their attention away from their jobs. So purpose, clarity of purpose is always going to be number one. Alignment throughout the company is going to be number two, making sure that all of our communications are aligned and supportive of each other, that they don't sound disjointed. Because if you send out a lot of comms that don't sound like they are part of the same overall message or overall purpose, you lose some integrity there with your reader. And we definitely do not want that internally. And then lastly, just operational understanding. Do they understand why this is important? Do they understand why their role in this message is going to better, their jobs and the company as a whole? So I would say, no matter the audience, I always have kind of a few key things that I'm keeping in mind for that specific audience. And it's almost like a little mini checklist for me whenever I'm writing out that message. If I'm writing out a message to patients and I see something in there about, reducing costs, huge red flag, right? So you definitely just have to make sure that, you know how to code switch. And in this case, I feel like code switching is a positive.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's a skill set in itself.
Definitely. No, I love that. So yeah, another practical tip, checklists on, when I'm speaking to this audience, make sure I'm focusing on these things. And I think one of the things you also said was like, yeah, alignment in comms, right? And I think with so many different messages and going out these days and everybody just, bombarded with different messages, it's not so much about saying a lot, it's about saying the same thing over and over again, right? And
Totally. Yeah. And I think if you maintain, let's say, a small checklist of 3 key areas that you want to make sure you always hit when you're talking to, a patient audience, then over time, what you are creating with each message is consistency. You're creating themes. So it's not just, well, am I giving reassurance in this one message? It's, I've checked to make sure that I'm giving reassurance in every single message. And now if you look back on all the messages from this past quarter, you see a theme of reassurance. And that's, to me, it's stronger than anything. It helps solidify the trust factor, the credibility source. So, the more consistent you can be, the better. And this was something that comes back from my teaching days. You can never give somebody information once and expect them to master it based off of that one interaction. We all need practice. It's like tying your shoes. You don't tie them once and know how to do it the rest of your life. You got to practice a few times. Same thing with sharing information, even with a simple comm. If we're sending out one comm with a lot of pertinent information, you can't truly expect that reader to, 1, read it, 2, truly process it, 3, put it into whatever action you're hoping that they'll take. You have to say it more than once. You have to drill it into their brains. And that's where that checklist also comes into play, because you're creating a consistency or a pattern that they can rely on. And that's something that a lot of readers respond well to.
Yeah, so good. And that reminded me of, I just saw this the other day is there's a stat out there that like, yeah, if you have a conversation today, by tomorrow, you've forgotten 70% or more of
Right.
what was talked about, right? So to your point, I think we can often say like, oh, well, we communicated that last week. But yeah, how
Right.
many, who is remembering that from last week, right? Yet alone yesterday, right? So I think
Yeah.
consistently, that message and consistently sending out that one key message, I think is crucial. So I wanted to shift gears. I'm always really interested to hear how people are learning AI and using AI, and we're all at different stages of that journey. I think some of us are far ahead, and some of us are just exploring it. But what are you kind of seeing for the potential of AI in healthcare marketing?
Yeah, I think, I don't view it as something that wholly will replace, comms or comms endeavors. I do see it as a great tool for, first drafting, ideation. I could also see it being something that's really great at personalization at scale. So if you have one central message and you need to get it to three different types of audiences, that is a great way to leverage AI to take that one message and then scale it for a variety of audiences. With things like this, I could see it being great for like smart automation, for predictable pathways, for things like emails or patient FAQs, partner onboarding, things like that. So I see it being a huge help in nuance with comms. I think there's still a lot of responsibility on a company to understand their personal voice, their personal tone, their brand. But I think in doing that, if you can take charge of that as the comms director or, as a marketing manager, if you can keep a hand on that, but then leverage AI to create the personalization that you need, I think that's a great way for AI to help you be as effective as you can be.
Totally. Yeah, you mentioned a few things there for sure. And it reminded me of, you mentioned you have this checklist that you go through when you write for different, audiences. And I think that's potentially where AI could help, right? Is like, hey, here's my checklist for this audience. Can you review this copy and make sure that,
Yeah.
I've adjusted it for them and personalized it, as you said, at scale. Are you seeing, in the healthcare space, are you seeing a lot of quick adoption around AI, or is there still a lot of, maybe fear around it, or just a lot of regulations, or maybe internal teams saying, hey, we haven't vetted tools, or anything like that? Is there a lot of, yeah, where's kind of AI in the healthcare space from your perspective in
Yeah.
marketing? Yeah.
Sure. I don't see a lot of the fear that I would have anticipated maybe 3 years ago. I About 3 years ago, I felt like that fear was starting to creep up. Right now, I would say the pulse check that I have on it in healthcare is that we are mindful that it's there. But for, a lot of companies, they have their own legal teams. So as far as actually utilizing it, my experience is that it's still kind of, that it's great that it's there. Let's hold off. Like it's something to be mindful of and hopeful for, but not something that's being fully engaged at this time. And I think where that really falls down to is each healthcare company wants to be very careful to own their voice and their tone. And they want to make sure that we do have an actual in-person team that is, taking the charge on this, just to better solidify the branding. So I think as long as that stays the focus, I could see AI as being a tool that helps optimize those endeavors, not fully replace any of those endeavors, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think everybody's just trying to figure it out, right? And I think it
Yeah,
can be helpful in a lot of ways, but as I'm sure internal teams are saying, is you have to be careful, right? And
right.
I've seen it make up stuff all the time. And so
Yes.
you do, especially when you're putting out communications in your space, you have to be
Yeah.
extremely careful that it's accurate and trustworthy,
Yes.
and that sort of
Totally.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think also from a healthcare standpoint, you don't want to lean on it too heavily or too quickly, even for something as seemingly harmless as a calm, because on the off chance that you include a mistake that came from AI, you've now jeopardized your credibility in all the other respects. So if you have a med department that releases publications, or if you've been included in a medical journal, now all of a sudden you might have people looking a little bit sideways. So you have to just be very careful and really kind of weigh out how any of these actions could play out, not just for you, but for the rest of the company and all the other departments that are actively in the publishing realm.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. No, I appreciate your take. And yeah, I think we all see the benefits, but I think it's we also see the risks. And so
Yes.
it's always hard to try to figure those two and balance those two. And
Yeah.
but it can definitely help as we talked about. Yeah, kind of the last question I always like to ask. I always like to learn. And so what's one maybe mistake or learning moment that you had in your, it can be your whole career and that really changed maybe how you approach content now or just approach the way you view things now?
Yeah. I thought about this a lot, and I would say my biggest lesson from teaching and also just in comms is to really be careful about that inner drive to over explain something. With teaching, if I over explain something, it frustrated my students. It made them feel like I didn't trust them to be smart enough to receive a base level explanation of whatever the topic was. It almost like I was babying them, right? And I've noticed this in comms as well. If I'm over explaining something, the audience is frustrated. They're on a time crunch. Even in personal relationships, if I'm over explaining something, usually it has something to do with an insecurity for me. So my biggest lesson here is to fight the urge to over explain and to trust myself that a clear explanation is always better than one in excess. Even though it might feel like a crutch or it might feel like a comfort blanket to get every single thought out of my brain, there needs to be some kind of ego death at play to remind myself that not every single thought that I have is worthy of being put out into the open, which I think is the opposite of what we're seeing with the use of social media. So the more we can reduce the over explaining, the clearer our messages can be, the less room there is for argument or confusion or misinterpretation. But being able to do that, like I said, it takes a lot of accountability. It takes a lot of pulling yourself back. It's not very comfortable and it is vulnerable in its own way, but I have found it to be very rewarding and very effective whenever I am reaching to any kind of audience.
No, that's a great lesson and great take. I think that's something I'm now thinking about because I think I have the tendency to over-explain. So I think that was really good. Hey, I mean, I really appreciated your conversation today. I think there were a lot of really cool takeaways that I took away from it. A lot of practical examples as well. And so, yeah, I really appreciate your unique perspective. And I think one of the things that stood out is just, yeah, how much from the education sector and from teaching you've brought into marketing. And I think one of the things that's cool about that is you had direct feedback there as a teacher and in marketing. I don't know if we always get that direct feedback right away, right? So I think it was really cool to hear from you who got direct feedback for so long, and then now you're in marketing and comms, and you can take those learnings into your role here. So yeah, I really appreciate you joining. It's been great chatting with you, and yeah, thanks so much, Nora.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and rate us wherever you listen to your podcast. Or leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. If video is not already part of your marketing content strategy, it's not too late to start. Create amazing videos with Lumen5's AI-powered video creator without the need for any design or video editing experience. Check us out at lumen5.com to supercharge your marketing, or follow us on LinkedIn for updates and resources. As always, keep making purposeful content in this B2B world. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.